I'm standing on the sidewalk outside my own storefront, rain misting against my face, watching through the glass as a woman I know too well freezes mid-step on the pavement. Stephanie, my stepmother, has stopped directly in front of the window display. Her umbrella dangles forgotten at her side. Her mouth is slightly open, her carefully maintained composure cracking like cheap glaze on pottery. She's staring at the center mannequin, the one wearing the reconstructed vintage blazer in charcoal wool with those distinctive brass buttons, the shoulders taken in and reshped, the lapels rebuilt with burgundy silk lining that catches the warm light from inside. She recognizes it. I can see the exact moment the recognition hits, the way her head tilts, the way her hand comes up almost to the glass before she catches herself. Of course she recognizes it. She's the one who shoved it into a garbage bag 2 years ago, drove it to Goodwill, and donated it to clear space. The sign above her head glows in brushed brass letters. Maya reclaimed and reimagined. My name. My brand. My storefront in the revitalized arts district. The one with the original oak floors and the floor-to-ceiling windows and the exposed brick I spent 3 weekends repointing myself because I couldn't afford to hire it done. Through the glass, I can see the rest of the opening night crowd inside. Customers in the pieces I made, friends holding champagne in mismatched vintage coupes, the lifestyle blogger who wrote my first real press feature taking photos of the wall installation. There's laughter, warmth, the golden glow of Edison bulbs strung across the ceiling. It looks like a dream I didn't know I was allowed to have. And here's Stephanie, standing in the rain, staring at a piece of clothing she threw away like trash, now displayed under museum lighting with a price tag that reflects its actual worth. I should feel triumphant. Maybe I do. But there's something else underneath it, something that tastes like old grief and new wine, bittersweet and complex. How did we get here? Let me rewind. 2 years ago, I was 26 years old and living in my childhood bedroom in the suburbs, sleeping under the same dusty ceiling fan I'd stared at since I was 14, when my father married Stephanie, and she moved into the house where my mother's ghost still lived in the floorboards. I was working a double shift that Saturday, morning at the boutique downtown where I sold other people's designs and smiled through commission-crushing returns, then an afternoon doing alterations at the dry cleaner for cash under the table. My feet ached. I smelled like lavender fabric spray and the burnt coffee from the boutique's break room. All I wanted was to come home, peel off my clothes, and spend a few hours at my desk working on the prototype I'd been draping all week. A jacket reconstruction I was doing for my portfolio, taking apart a men's 1940s overcoat and rebuilding it into something new, something mine. I opened the front door a little after 7. The house smelled like Stephanie's signature candle, something called Coastal Calm that somehow managed to smell like neither coast nor calm, just expensive wax and control. Maya, is that you, honey? Stephanie's voice floated from the kitchen, bright and warm, the tone she used when she was about to tell me something I wouldn't like while framing it as a gift. I should have known right then. I dropped my bag and headed upstairs, already thinking about which seam ripper I needed, whether the sleeve cap would work if I opened my bedroom door and stopped breathing. Half my room was gone. Not gone like robbed, gone like erased. The vintage pieces I'd had hanging on the decorative ladder against the wall, gone. The carefully curated stack of men's blazers I'd been collecting from estate sales, studying the construction, planning to deconstruct, gone. My open shelving unit where I kept fabric swatches organized by color and weight, half of it empty. The accordion hooks where I'd hung my mother's silk scarf, the one that still held the faintest ghost of her Chanel No. 5, empty. I stood in the doorway, my heart doing something arrhythmic and painful. "Oh good, you're home." Stephanie appeared behind me, slightly breathless, still in her athleisure set from whatever reformer Pilates class she'd attended that morning. Her blonde highlights were perfect. Her smile was radiant. "I did you the biggest favor today, sweetie. I know you've been meaning to declutter, you're always so busy, and I had some time, so I just went ahead and took care of it for you." I couldn't speak. I was doing a mental inventory, trying to catalog what was missing, each absent piece a small death. "I donated 6 bags to Goodwill," she continued, stepping into my room and surveying it with satisfaction, hands on her hips like she'd just revealed a home makeover. 6 bags, Maya. You had so much stuff in here. I mean, you're almost 30. I'm 26. And it's just not healthy to hold on to all this clutter. I read an article about how physical clutter creates mental clutter, and I just thought, what kind of mother would I be if I didn't help you create space to grow? The word mother hit me like a slap, the way it always did when she used it. What did you take? My voice came out flat, careful, the tone I'd learned to use when I needed to get information without escalating. Oh, just old clothes you haven't worn in years, fabric scraps, some musty vintage things that honestly probably had moths. What did you take? Something flickered across her face, irritation maybe at being interrupted, but she recovered quickly. I didn't inventory it, Maya. I just grabbed things that were obviously taking up space. Those old blazers, some scarves, a bunch of random jackets, fabric pieces. Honestly, it was mostly junk. The kind of things you hold on to for sentimental reasons but never actually use. I was helping you let go. My mother's scarf. The prototype jacket I'd been working on for 3 months. The 1950s cocktail dress I'd found at an estate sale. The one with the hand-sewn beading I'd been studying to learn the technique. The men's cashmere overcoat from the 80s with the insane shoulder construction. The blazer, the charcoal wool blazer with the brass buttons that my mother bought me from a consignment store before she died. The one I wore to my only fashion internship in college. The one that made me feel capable and professional, and like maybe I could actually do this. Gone, all of it. Shoved into garbage bags and handed over to a teenager at a donation center, dumped into a bin with everyone else's discarded lives. Where's the scarf? I heard myself ask. The silk one, it was hanging by the window. Oh, that old thing. Honey, it was practically falling apart. That was my mother's. Stephanie's face did something complicated. I know you have a lot of feelings about your mom, sweetie, but she's been gone for 14 years. At some point, you have to ask yourself if holding onto every little thing is honoring her memory or just keeping yourself stuck in the past. The air left my lungs. This is the thing about Stephanie. She could say the cruelest things in the gentlest voice, frame boundary violations as therapy, make erasure sound like love. I'm doing this asterisk for asterisk you, she continued, and now there was an edge underneath the sweetness, the tone that said I was being ungrateful, difficult, childish. You need to grow up, Maya. You need to let go of this fantasy that you're going to be some kind of fashion designer and start building a real life. I'm trying to help you do that. Your father and I both think. Where's Dad? At the hardware store. But we talked about this, and we both agreed that you need some tough love right now. You're spinning your wheels, working retail jobs, playing with fabric scraps in your bedroom like you're still in high school. It's time to be realistic. I stared at her expensive leggings and her blowout and her face that was so concerned, so loving, so absolutely certain that she was right. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have told her exactly what she'd done, made her understand that those weren't random clothes. They were an archive, a study collection, the physical vocabulary I was teaching myself because I couldn't afford to go back to design school. I could have explained that the scarf wasn't just a scarf. It was the last thing I owned that still smelled like my mother, that I used to hold it when I couldn't sleep, that it was the only thing I had left after Stephanie redecorated the entire house and erased every trace of the woman who'd lived here first. But I'd learned, over 12 years of living with Stephanie, that explanations were just ammunition. Anything I said would be used as evidence of my immaturity, my dramatics, my inability to let go and move forward. So I said, okay. Okay, she blinked, surprised. She'd been ready for a fight. Okay, thank you for cleaning. The words tasted like ashes. Her smile returned, brilliant and victorious. Oh, honey, I'm so glad you understand. This is going to be so good for you, I promise. Fresh start, clean slate. Now you have room to really think about your future. Actually, I printed out some job listings I think you'd be great for. There's an administrative assistant position at the insurance company where Cheryl works, and they have amazing benefits. I stopped listening. I was doing math in my head, calculating my savings, how many alterations gigs I'd need to afford a security deposit, whether I could survive on ramen and oatmeal for a few months. I was also making a list, cataloging every piece I could remember, every texture and seam and story, burning them into my memory because memory was all I had left. That night, after Stephanie went to bed, I sat on my floor surrounded by what remained and let myself cry for the first time since my mother's funeral. I cried for the scarf. I cried for the blazer. I cried for every piece of clothing that had been a breadcrumb trail back to the person I was supposed to become. But I also started sketching. Because here's what Stephanie didn't understand, would never understand. You can't kill a creative drive by throwing away fabric. You can't erase someone's identity by donating their clothes. You can only show them exactly how little you think of them, and sometimes that clarity is the kindest gift of all. I didn't know it yet, standing there in my half-empty room with tears on my face and a pencil in my hand. But Stephanie had just given me something more valuable than she'd taken. She'd given me a reason. But to understand why this betrayal cut so deep, why those specific pieces mattered so much, I need to take you back further. Back to when I was 12 years old and my mother taught me that fashion wasn't about vanity, it was about translation. About taking the invisible things you felt and making them visible, wearable, real. My mother died in October. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to hospice, a brutal efficiency that still doesn't feel real even now. I was 12. One day I had a mother who smelled like coffee and perfume and fabric sizing, who took me to estate sales on Sunday mornings and taught me to read garment construction like a language, to feel the difference between a serged seam and a French seam with my eyes closed. Who told me that clothes were just wearable stories, and if I learned to read them, I'd never be bored. And then I didn't have her anymore. Dad tried. I need to say that. He tried. He was drowning in his own grief, working double shifts at the engineering firm to pay off medical bills, and he didn't know what to do with a 12-year-old daughter who kept stealing into her dead mother's closet to sleep on the floor surrounded by clothes that still smelled like her. For 2 years, it was just us. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. I learned to cook pasta that wasn't completely inedible. We were sad and quiet and tender with each other in the way of people who have survived the same shipwreck. Then he met Stephanie at a work conference. She was a corporate event planner, polished and competent and aggressively alive in a way that must have felt like oxygen after years of grieving. They dated for 8 months. I was cautiously hopeful. I wanted Dad to be happy, and I thought maybe, secretly, it would be nice to have a mother figure again. Someone to ask about periods and high school drama and whether this eyeshadow looked stupid. They got married the summer I turned 14. Stephanie moved in. The redecorating started immediately. It was subtle at first. New throw pillows, a different shower curtain, but then it was new paint. The house is so dark, Michael, we need to lighten it up. And new furniture, and one day I came home from school and my mother's reading chair was gone. Just gone. Replaced with a modern accent chair in gray linen that no one ever sat in. "Where's the chair?" I asked Dad. He looked uncomfortable. Stephanie thought it was time for an update, Maya Bear. The upholstery was pretty worn. I could have reupholstered it. "You're 14. I could have learned. But it was already gone, donated or trashed or sold. I never found out which. That's how it went, piece by piece. My mother's cookbooks replaced with Stephanie's matching Williams-Sonoma collection. The gallery wall of family photos edited, rearranged, until my mother appeared in only 2 frames, pushed to the side. The garden my mother had planted with weird heirloom roses dug up and replaced with boxwoods because they were more classic. When I got upset, Dad told me Stephanie was just making the house her own, and I needed to give her a chance. When I went quiet and stopped arguing, everyone was relieved. Easier, better. I learned to keep my mother in my room. In the clothes I secretly took from her closet before Stephanie could donate them. In the fabric scraps I saved. In the fashion sketches, I started drawing in notebooks I hid under my mattress. Stephanie was never overtly cruel. That's the thing people don't understand about this kind of harm. It's not screaming or hitting. It's 1,000 small cuts, each one delivered with a smile. She praised me when I was conventional. You look so pretty when you wear normal clothes. She worried about me when I was creative. I just think you should have a backup plan, something practical. She compared me, constantly, to her friends' daughters who were pre-med, pre-law, sensibly engaged. When I got into a small art college on a partial scholarship, she congratulated me but made sure to mention, at every family dinner, how expensive it was, how impractical, how some people just aren't meant for creative careers. I lasted 1 year before the combination of cost and constant undermining made me drop out. I told myself I'd go back. I got a job at the boutique, then the alterations gig. I kept designing in secret, in my room, in the space I'd managed to keep as mine. And Stephanie kept pushing, kept inserting herself, kept trying to manage me into someone more palatable, more normal, more like her. The donation wasn't the beginning. It was the culmination. It was Stephanie looking at the last space where my mother and my future still coexisted and deciding it was clutter. It was her taking the language my mother taught me, the language of fabric and construction and creative translation, and throwing it away like garbage. It was supposed to erase me. But here's what she didn't count on. I had already learned to read that language fluently. And you can donate the books, but you can't unlearn how to read. The donation wasn't an isolated incident. That's what I need you to understand. It was just the loudest note in a symphony of dismissal that had been playing since Stephanie moved into our house when I was 14. There was the time she, accidentally, threw out an entire box of fabric samples I'd collected from the garment district on a school trip to New York. I'd saved for months for that trip. Spent hours in those wholesale stores running my hands over silks and brocades and wools I couldn't afford to buy, asking for samples, building a reference library. I kept them in a carefully labeled box under my bed. Stephanie found them during spring cleaning and decided they were scraps, garbage, trash. By the time I got home from school, they were already at the dump. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry," she said, hand to her chest, eyes wide with performed regret. "I had no idea those were important. They just look like random fabric pieces. Why would you keep something like that if it wasn't important enough to label clearly?" The box had been labeled, in my handwriting. Maya's fabric samples do not touch. But pointing that out would make me difficult, ungrateful, angry, so I swallowed it. There was the time she went through my sketchbooks while I was at work and later, at a family dinner with her sister visiting, mentioned, "The little drawings Maya does like paper dolls, it's sweet in a voice dripping with gentle condescension." My sketchbooks weren't paper dolls. They were technical drawings, flat sketches, design development work, but explaining that would just prove I was taking my hobby too seriously. There was the time she set up a job interview for me at an insurance company without asking, just announced at breakfast that I had an interview at 10 and should wear something professional, maybe borrow one of my blazers since you don't really have office clothes. When I said I hadn't applied there and wasn't interested, she got that wounded look, the one that made me the bad guy. "I'm just trying to help you build a career, Maya. I used my connections for you. The least you could do is show up." I went to the interview. I wore her blazer, which fit me like a cardboard box because we weren't remotely the same size. I sat through 45 minutes of questions about insurance compliance and nodded and smiled and died a little inside. When they offered me the job, I turned it down. Stephanie didn't speak to me for 3 days, then acted like nothing had happened, but the message was clear. I was ungrateful, impractical, foolish. There were the family dinners where Stephanie's daughter from her first marriage, Claire, 28, corporate attorney, sensibly engaged to another corporate attorney, was held up like a mirror to show me my own deficiency. "Claire just made junior partner," Stephanie would announce, beaming. "She's the youngest in her firm, we're so proud." "That's great," I'd say, and mean it, because I didn't have anything against Claire, who was perfectly nice in the distant way of someone who had nothing in common with me. "She's so focused," Stephanie would continue, looking at me meaningfully. "She's always known exactly what she wanted and went after it strategically, no distractions." The implication being that I was distracted, unfocused, floating aimlessly while my stepsister conquered the world in pencil skirts and sensible heels. Or there was my personal favorite, the time Stephanie asked, at Thanksgiving dinner in front of her entire extended family, "Maya, honey, when are you going to start a real career? You've been doing this retail thing for years now. Don't you want to do something that matters?" I'd been working 60-hour weeks between the boutique and alterations, barely sleeping, squeezing in design work at midnight. I was 25 years old and so tired my bones ached. "I like what I do," I said quietly. "But is it going anywhere?" She said it so kindly, with such concern. "I just worry that you're going to wake up at 35 and realize you've wasted your 20s on jobs that don't build toward anything. You're so smart, Maya. You could do so much more if you just applied yourself to something practical." Dad, sitting next to her, said nothing. He never said anything. Just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject or backed her up with soft, conflict-avoidant phrases like, "Stephanie's just worried about you," or "She has a point, Maya Bear." I learned to gray rock. That's the term I found later, reading articles about dealing with narcissists. You make yourself smooth, uninteresting, unreactive. You don't give them anything to grip onto. You say, "Maybe you're right and I'll think about it and thanks for the advice," and you let it roll off while staying completely opaque. But every comment was a small cut. Every accidentally trashed sketch, every unsolicited job listing printed and left on my bed, every comparison to Claire or Stephanie's friends' daughters who were doctors or lawyers or married or pregnant or anything other than what I was. Every time Stephanie walked into my room, my one space that was supposed to be mine, and commented on the clutter or the mess or suggested I really should think about a more mature aesthetic, maybe something more minimalist. My room wasn't cluttered. It was full of fabric and inspiration and work in progress and the carefully curated archive of a designer teaching herself a trade. But to Stephanie, anything that didn't look like her aesthetic, her beige on beige, everything matches, West Elm catalog sterility, was chaos that needed correcting. She performed this perfect suburban mother role for everyone else. PTA president, charity volunteer, always hosting book club, always organizing neighborhood potlucks. People loved her. "You're so lucky to have Stephanie," her friends would tell me. "She's so supportive." And she was supportive, if support meant trying to sand down every rough edge, every creative impulse, every part of me that didn't fit her vision of who I should be. The donation was just the loudest version of what she'd been doing all along, deciding that the things that made me myself were inconvenient, unnecessary, and needed to be removed. The difference was that this time, she'd gone too far. The day after the donation, I woke up with a specific, desperate plan. I was going to get it back. I called in sick to both jobs, got in my car, and started hitting every Goodwill within a 20-mile radius. I had a list in my head, the most important pieces, the ones I absolutely needed to find. The scarf, the blazer, the prototype jacket, the beaded cocktail dress. The first Goodwill was overwhelming, racks and racks of clothes crammed together, everything smelling like other people's lives, and that specific thrift store mixture of detergent and dust and time. I went through every single item in the women's vintage section, every blazer, every jacket, every dress. My hands shook as I pushed hangers aside, fast and then faster, looking for something familiar. Nothing. The second Goodwill was bigger, more chaotic. I found a blazer that was close, same era, similar cut, and my heart leapt before I realized it was the wrong color, wrong buttons, wrong everything. Not mine. Just something that looked like mine, the way all loss looks like other loss if you're desperate enough. I did find a few pieces. A men's overcoat I'd been studying, shoved in with the winter coats. A skirt I'd thrifted months ago and forgotten about. Random pieces from the 6 bags Stephanie had donated, scattered now across the store, separated from their context, just orphaned clothes waiting for someone else to give them meaning. I bought them back, paid for my own clothes. The irony tasted bitter. But the scarf wasn't there. The blazer wasn't there. The prototype jacket I'd spent 3 months constructing, learning to set a sleeve cap properly, teaching myself techniques I couldn't afford to learn in school, gone. Already sold, probably. Already in someone else's closet. Just another vintage find with no idea of its history. The third Goodwill was in a strip mall next to a Dollar Tree, fluorescent lights, linoleum floors. The vintage section was 3 racks, picked over, nothing interesting. I stood there in the aisle, holding a stranger's shopping cart to steady myself, and something inside me just cracked open. I'd been holding it together through the shock, the search, the desperate hope that I could undo what Stephanie had done. But standing there under those horrible lights, surrounded by racks of discarded lives, I realized it was gone, really gone. No amount of searching was going to bring back my mother's scarf. That specific object, with her specific scent still caught in the silk fibers, was gone. Some stranger had bought it for $3, or it was sitting in a donation bin somewhere, or it had been thrown away as too damaged to sell. The blazer she bought me when I was 17, the one that made me feel like I could be the person I wanted to become, someone else's now. The prototype, the one that proved to myself that I could actually construct a garment from scratch, gone. All of it gone. I stood there and felt something shift fundamentally inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging. Like the moment before an earthquake when everything goes quiet and still. I'd been waiting for permission my entire life. Permission from my father to grieve my mother loudly instead of quietly. Permission from Stephanie to take up space, to be creative, to want things she didn't understand. Permission from the universe to call myself a designer even though I'd dropped out of school, even though I worked retail, even though I didn't have a degree or a studio or anything that made it official. I'd been waiting for someone to tell me I was good enough, talented enough, practical enough, ready enough. And standing in that Goodwill, holding a stranger's cart, staring at racks of nobody's clothes, I realized permission wasn't coming. No one was going to hand it to me, and more importantly, I didn't need it. Stephanie had taken my things to make me smaller, more manageable, more like the version of me she could understand and control. But she couldn't take my hands. She couldn't take my eyes that knew how to read a seam, a drape, a construction technique. She couldn't take the 10,000 hours I'd spent teaching myself this language. She couldn't take my mother's voice in my head. Clothes are just wearable stories, baby, and you're going to tell beautiful ones. I left the Goodwill empty-handed, got in my car, drove home in silence. That night I didn't go downstairs for dinner. I heard Stephanie call up once, "Maya, aren't you eating?" And I shouted back that I wasn't hungry. She didn't push it. Why would she? As far as she knew, I'd accepted the donation, accepted her control, accepted my place. I sat on my floor, surrounded by what remained, and opened my laptop. First, I opened my design portfolio from college, the one I hadn't looked at in 3 years because it hurt too much to remember what I'd wanted to be. The sketches were rough, student work, but there was something there. A voice, a point of view. Then I opened the folder I'd titled, Someday. The secret sketches I'd been doing for years. Designs I told myself I'd make when I had time, money, space, permission. I looked at them for a long time. Then I opened a new document and started writing. Not sketching, writing. A list, an inventory, every single piece I could remember that Stephanie had donated. Every texture, every detail, every story. Charcoal wool blazer, brass buttons, burgundy lining. From Mom, first internship. Made me feel competent. Silk scarf, cream with navy geometric print. Chanel, Mom's, smelled like her perfume. Prototype jacket, reconstructed from men's overcoat. 3 months' work. Finally got the sleeve cap right. Beaded cocktail dress, 1950s, blush pink. Hand-sewn beading, 12 beads per inch. Was studying the technique. On and on, piece by piece. I cataloged what had been taken, and in cataloging it, I realized something. The clothes weren't random. They weren't just the oldest or the most damaged or the most cluttered. They were the pieces that meant something. The pieces that made me feel most like myself. The ones with history, with emotional weight, with my mother's ghost in the seams. Stephanie had taken the blazer, but left the fast fashion dress I'd bought on clearance and never worn. She'd taken the vintage pieces I was studying, but left the normal jeans, the acceptable sweaters. She'd taken my mother's scarf, but left the scarf she'd given me last Christmas, still with tags on. She'd known, on some level, exactly what she was taking. She'd identified the things that held my power and tried to erase them. But here's the thing about being a designer. You work with ghosts all the time. You see a vintage piece and imagine what it used to be, what it could become. You take something broken or outdated or forgotten and rebuild it into something new. I still had the memory of every piece she'd taken. I had the skills to reconstruct them, reimagine them, make them again but better. I started sketching. The blazer first. I drew it from memory, but I didn't just recreate it, I improved it. Reshaped the shoulders, modernized the silhouette, made the lining visible as a design detail instead of hidden. Made it stronger than it was. Then the jacket, the one I'd spent 3 months on, the prototype I'd finally gotten right. I sketched it again, but this time I added details I'd been afraid to try the first time. More complex seeming. Leather accents. Made it not a student project, but a real design. Then a dress inspired by the beaded one. Not a copy, an interpretation. The same meticulous handwork, but my own vision. And the scarf. I couldn't recreate my mother's scarf. That specific object was gone, but I could create something that honored it. A silk wrap dress with a geometric print, something that felt like her, that carried her aesthetic forward instead of just preserving it in amber. By 3 a.m, I had 12 sketches. By 5, I had 20. By the time the sun came up, I had the beginning of a collection. I titled it, in my head first and then on the page, Reclaimed and Reimagined. Every piece would be either a reconstructed vintage find or an original design inspired by something lost. Every piece would be a ghost brought back to life. Every piece would be proof that you can't erase someone by taking their things. You can only make them more determined to rebuild. I wasn't going to argue with Stephanie. I wasn't going to try to make her understand what she'd done or convince my father to take my side. I was going to move out. I was going to build the brand I'd been dreaming about since I was 17. And I was going to do it now, not someday. Not when I was ready, not when I had permission. Now. The loss of those clothes was supposed to break me, make me smaller, push me toward the practical life Stephanie envisioned. Instead, it was going to be the foundation of everything I built. I gave myself 2 weeks to find an apartment. Not because I had savings. I had maybe $1,200 in my checking account and another $800 in an emergency fund I'd been building since I was 19. Not enough for a decent place. Barely enough for first, last, and security on something small and probably depressing. But I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Not in that room that Stephanie had violated, not under that roof where my father chose peace over protection every single time. I found a studio apartment 40 minutes away, in a neighborhood that was in that transitional phase real estate listings call, up and coming, which means half the storefronts are empty and the late-night sirens are frequent, but the rent is almost affordable. 450 square feet, 1 room, a galley kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom where you could sit on the toilet and wash your hands in the sink simultaneously. The windows faced a brick wall. The radiator clanked like it was harboring ghosts. It was perfect. The landlord was a tired-looking woman in her 60s who asked for first month and security, no last month because, you look like you're running from something and I respect that. I didn't correct her. I signed the lease in the building's dim hallway, and when she handed me the keys, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been clenched tight since I was 14. I moved out on a Wednesday while Stephanie was at Pilates and Dad was at work. I didn't take much. My remaining clothes, my sewing machine, my dress form, my books, my laptop, the supplies and fabrics Stephanie hadn't thrown away. I left a note on the kitchen counter, got my own place. Need some space to figure things out. I'll be in touch. Dad called that night. Maya, what's going on? You just left. I'm 26, Dad. It was time. But so suddenly, Stephanie's upset. She thinks she did something wrong. The laugh that came out of me was sharp enough to cut. She donated my things without asking, Dad, including Mom's scarf. Silence. Then, she was just trying to help you declutter. She threw away Mom's scarf. Maya, his voice was pained, stretched thin. I know you're upset, but Stephanie was trying to help. She didn't know. It was labeled. It was on its own hook. She knew. More silence. I could hear him breathing, could feel him trying to find the words that would make this easier, smoother, less confrontational. The words that would make me come back and apologize and keep the peace. I have to go, I said. I'll call you later. I didn't call him later. I spent the first week in that apartment setting up my space. I hung my dress form by the window, set up my sewing machine on the tiny kitchen counter because there was nowhere else, organized my remaining fabrics on shelving units I found on the curb and cleaned with bleach, pinned sketches on every available wall. It was cramped and chaotic, and the radiator clanked, and my downstairs neighbor played bass-heavy music at random hours, and it was the first space I'd had since my mother died that was entirely, completely, unquestionably mine. I got a third job, started doing online freelance alterations through an app. People would mail me their clothes, I'd fix them, mail them back. It was tedious work, invisible work, hemming pants and taking in dresses and replacing zippers. But it paid. I worked the boutique in the mornings, alterations at the dry cleaner in the afternoons, freelance at night. Slept 5 hours if I was lucky. And in the hours between, the stolen hours, the early mornings before dawn and the late nights after midnight, I built my collection. I started going to estate sales every weekend. There's a specific kind of estate sale I learned to look for, the ones in older neighborhoods, advertised in local papers, where the family is selling off a whole house after someone dies. Those sales have the best vintage pieces, the clothes that were kept for decades, that survived trends and moves and spring cleanings because they meant something. I developed a strategy. Arrive early, scan for quality fabrics and interesting construction, buy anything with good bones even if it was damaged or stained or wildly outdated. I wasn't looking for wearable vintage. I was looking for teaching tools, source material, pieces I could take apart and study and rebuild into something new. I filled my tiny apartment with other people's discarded clothes, and I learned from them. How a 1940s shoulder was structured. How a 1960s shift dress achieved that particular clean line. How hand-finished hems felt different from machine-finished. How to recognize quality fabric by touch, by weight, by the way it moved. I deconstructed and reconstructed. Took apart a men's suit jacket and rebuilt it into a women's blazer with exaggerated shoulders and contrast stitching. Found a damaged silk slip dress and remade it into a wrap top. Bought a bag of vintage scarves for $5 and turned them into a patchwork jacket with each panel telling a different story. Every piece I made was a conversation with the piece Stephanie had taken. The blazer I rebuilt was talking to the blazer I'd lost. The wrap dress was talking to my mother's scarf. The hand-beaded collar I spent 40 hours stitching was talking to the cocktail dress I'd never see again. I was rebuilding my archive, but I was also building something new, something that was mine in a way the original pieces never could have been. And I was teaching myself business. I spent hours in the library. I couldn't afford internet in my apartment yet, watching YouTube videos on how to form an LLC, how to do basic bookkeeping, how to photograph clothing, how to build a brand on no budget. I read every fashion business book the library had, took notes in the margins of scratch paper, taught myself the language of wholesale and markup and cash flow. I registered my business, Maya Reclaimed Design, LLC. It cost $75 and felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. I opened an Instagram account. Spent a weekend watching tutorials on phone photography, learning to use natural light, to style flat lays, to create a cohesive aesthetic. My apartment had terrible light, so I started shooting in the early morning on my fire escape, using the brick wall as a backdrop. I posted my first photo on a Tuesday in November. A close-up of a blazer sleeve, the contrast stitching catching the light, the caption reading, reclaimed from a 1980s men's suit, rebuilt with intention. Nothing is wasted here. I had 17 followers, most of them spam accounts. But I kept posting. Every piece I finished, every detail shot, every work in progress. I wrote captions about reconstruction, about sustainability before I knew that was a selling point, about the idea that discarded things could be transformed into something more valuable than they were originally. I didn't mention Stephanie. I didn't mention my mother. I kept the story focused on the clothes, the process, the philosophy. Slowly, real people started following. 20 followers, 50, 100. People who cared about sustainable fashion, about vintage reconstruction, about the idea of rebuilding something from fragments. I also started keeping a journal. Not a diary. I'd never been good at processing my feelings through writing. But I tracked every dismissive comment I remembered, every time Stephanie had undermined me, every time my father had chosen peace over advocacy. Not because I was planning some dramatic confrontation, but because I needed to remember, on the hard days when I was eating rice and canned beans for the third night in a row, and my hands ached from sewing, and I wondered if I was delusional, that I hadn't left over nothing. I'd left because staying meant erasure, and I was done being erased. In February, 4 months after I'd moved out, I applied to a local makers market, a monthly weekend event in a converted warehouse where local artists and designers sold their work. The application asked for photos of my work, a description of my brand, and a $100 booth fee. I submitted my best pieces, the ones I was most proud of, wrote a description that focused on reconstruction and sustainability and wearable art. And then I waited. The acceptance email came on a Thursday. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. I'd been accepted for the March market. 8 by 8 foot booth space. Electricity included. Bring your own table and display materials. I had 4 weeks to prepare. I made a list, pieces to finish, display strategy, pricing structure, business cards, signage. I had 12 completed pieces and sketches for 8 more. I worked every spare hour, sewing until my fingers were stiff, until my eyes burned, until I'd finished 20 pieces I was genuinely proud of. I designed a banner on Canva, printed it at FedEx for $30. Maya reclaimed and reimagined. Simple, clean, professional. I found a folding table and a clothing rack at Goodwill. The irony wasn't lost on me, and practiced setting up the booth in my apartment until I could do it in under 20 minutes. The night before the market, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the radiator clank and my neighbor's bass and the city sounds filtering through the brick wall, and let myself imagine failure. No one stopping. No one buying. Confirmation that Stephanie was right, that this was a hobby, not a business, that I should have been practical. But I also let myself imagine something else, just for a moment. Success. The market opened at 10 on Saturday morning. I got there at 7 to set up, my car loaded with racks and pieces and supplies. The warehouse was enormous, high ceilings and concrete floors and industrial windows letting in cold March light. There were maybe 40 other vendors, all setting up, jewelry makers, ceramicists, candle makers, other clothing designers. I set up my booth in the back corner, hung my banner, arranged my pieces by color, then by style, then by color again because I couldn't decide which looked better. Put out the small stack of business cards I'd printed. Simple cardstock with my Instagram handle and email. By 9:30, I was ready. By 9:45, I was nauseous with anxiety. At 10, the doors opened. The first hour was slow. People browsed, touched fabrics, asked polite questions. I smiled until my face ached and tried not to sound desperate. A few people took business cards. No one bought anything. By 11, I'd mentally calculated how many more months I could survive on rice and beans before I'd have to give up and find a real job, just like Stephanie predicted. Then a woman stopped at my booth. Mid-30s, interesting asymmetrical haircut, wearing vintage herself. I clocked a 1970s leather jacket over a modern dress. She picked up one of my blazers, the one I'd reconstructed from a men's suit, and examined the seams. "You did this construction yourself?" she asked. "Yes, deconstructed the original piece and rebuilt it entirely. The shoulder is incredible, and this stitching," she touched the contrast top stitching along the lapel. "This is really beautiful work." Something warm bloomed in my chest. "Thank you." "How much?" I told her, held my breath. "I'll take it." My first sale. I wrapped it in tissue paper I'd bought in bulk, hands shaking slightly, and she paid in cash and told me she'd follow me on Instagram. After she left, I had to sit down for a minute, just breathing, just holding the cash and feeling the reality of it. Someone had paid money for something I made. Someone valued my work enough to exchange actual currency for it. The afternoon got busier. More people stopped, asked questions, engaged with the concept. I sold a reconstructed denim jacket, then a wrap dress, then a hand-embroidered collar piece I'd spent 3 weeks on. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. People started telling me their stories. A woman in her 50s picked up a blazer I'd made from a vintage men's coat and started crying. "My father used to wear something like this," she said. "He died last year and we had to donate all his clothes. I couldn't keep them, but I missed them. This feels like having a piece of that back." A younger woman, maybe my age, asked about my process, and when I explained the concept, reclaiming discarded pieces and transforming them, she said quietly, "I love that. I feel like I've spent my whole life being told the things I love are worthless, and you're saying they can be remade into something valuable." Yes, exactly that. By the end of the day, I'd sold 4 pieces, made $380 after the booth fee, collected 27 business cards from people who wanted to follow my work, and I'd had dozens of conversations that felt like mutual recognition, like finding my people. But the most important thing happened as I was packing up. A woman approached my booth holding a phone, introduced herself as Kira, said she ran a local lifestyle blog called City Authentic that focused on local makers and sustainable living. She'd been walking the market taking photos, and my booth had caught her eye. "Would you be open to being featured?" she asked. "I'd love to write something about your process, the reclamation concept. It's exactly the kind of story my readers care about." I must have said yes. I must have given her my contact information. I remember nodding, smiling, trying to sound professional instead of desperate and grateful and shocked. She came to my apartment the following week, photographed pieces, interviewed me about my process and philosophy. I didn't tell her about Stephanie, about the donation. I kept it focused on the positive: transformation, sustainability, the beauty of rebuilding. The article went live on a Thursday. Local designer turns thrift store finds into wearable art. It was short, maybe 400 words, with photos of 3 of my pieces and a headshot of me in my tiny apartment, surrounded by fabric, looking like an actual designer instead of a retail worker playing dress-up. Within 24 hours, my Instagram grew by 300 followers. I got a dozen DMs asking about custom work, about pricing, about where they could buy my pieces. Someone tagged me in a story repost, then another. I sat on my apartment floor, watching the follower count tick up, reading comments from strangers who called my work stunning and meaningful and exactly what fashion should be, and I let myself feel it, just for a moment. Hope. Not the careful, protected hope I'd been rationing like limited currency, but real hope, the dangerous kind, the kind that imagines a future where this actually works. The Makers Market invited me back for April. Then a coffee shop owner who'd seen the article reached out, asked if I wanted to do a pop-up in her space. She just renovated and wanted to support local makers. I said yes. I started working on new pieces, building the collection, thinking bigger, not just monthly markets, maybe a small wholesale account, maybe trunk shows, maybe eventually my own space. Maybe Stephanie had been wrong about everything. I didn't hear from my family for 6 months. Radio silence. I'd called Dad once in March, a brief, awkward conversation where he asked if I was done with this phase, and I'd said no, This wasn't a phase, and he'd sighed and said Stephanie missed me and I should come to Sunday dinner. I didn't go. Then in June, everything changed. I got a text from Stephanie. Just her name on my screen was jarring. I'd almost forgotten she had my number, that she existed in my world at all anymore. Hi Maya, hope you're doing well. Would love to catch up over coffee if you have time. Miss you, Red. I stared at the text for a full minute, trying to decode it. Stephanie never initiated contact with me. Never. Our entire relationship had been her managing me, correcting me, inserting herself into my space, but never pursuing me. I asked around, casually in a text to Dad. Stephanie wants to get coffee. His response, she heard you're doing something with fashion, wants to support you. There it was. Stephanie had heard, through what network of suburban gossip, I could only imagine, that I was getting some attention. The blog post had been shared fairly widely in local circles. The coffee shop pop-up had been moderately successful. I'd been tagged in enough Instagram posts that I was becoming vaguely visible in the local maker scene. And now Stephanie wanted in. I should have ignored the text, should have protected my peace, maintained the boundary, kept her out of this part of my life that I'd built specifically to get away from her. But there was a part of me, a stupid, hopeful part that wondered, what if she'd changed? What if she'd seen the blog post and actually understood, finally, that this wasn't a hobby? What if she wanted to apologize? So I said yes. We met at a cafe in her neighborhood, one of those aggressively charming places with reclaimed wood and succulents and $7 lattes. Stephanie was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking exactly like herself. Expensive athleisure, fresh blowout, tasteful jewelry. She stood and hugged me, which felt like being embraced by a well-dressed mannequin. Maya, you look great. I love this. She gestured vaguely at my outfit, a vintage band tee tucked into wide-leg trousers I'd made from reclaimed fabric. Very artistic. We sat. She asked about my apartment, my jobs, made small talk that felt like we were strangers at a networking event instead of family. Then she got to it. So I heard you're doing fashion design, like actually pursuing it. Her voice was bright, encouraging with just the slightest undertone of surprise. I have a small brand, yes, reconstructed vintage pieces. That's so exciting. See, I always knew you were creative. I told your father Maya just needs to find her thing. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. I actually wanted to talk to you about that, she continued, leaning forward with that concerned, helpful expression I knew so well. I have some ideas that might really help you take this to the next level. I've been doing events for 15 years. I understand branding and marketing, and I think with the right strategy you could really make something of this. There it was, the insertion, the takeover. I'm good, actually. I have a plan. I'm sure you do, honey, but there's a difference between a hobby plan and a real business plan. Have you thought about getting a loan? Your father and I could co-sign. I don't need a loan. And I have a whole network of women who would love custom pieces. My book club, my junior league friends. I could introduce you, maybe even host a little trunk show at our house. Stephanie, I set down my coffee carefully. I appreciate the offer, but I'm growing this organically. I don't need introductions. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Maya, I'm just trying to help. You don't have to be so defensive. I'm not being defensive. I'm being clear. I have a plan and I want to execute it my way. But do you have a real plan? Or is this another one of your impulsive creative things that you'll lose interest in when it gets hard? And there it was, the mask slipping. The real Stephanie, the one who'd always believed I was impractical, flighty, a child playing dress-up. What do you want? I asked, flat direct. She blinked. What do I want? I want to help you, Maya. I want us to have a relationship again. You just disappeared, you won't come to Sunday dinners, you barely talk to your father. You donated my mother's scarf. When we left, he hugged me in the parking lot and he felt fragile. I love you, kiddo, he said. I love you too. I drove home and cried in my car for 20 minutes. And then I went inside and I started living my life, February came quietly. I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed, stopped bracing for Linda's name to appear. The calls from relatives had tapered off. Dad and I had coffee twice, stilted, careful conversations where we talked about his physical therapy and my work travel and skirted around everything that mattered. But we were talking. That was something. Work consumed me in the best way. We were rolling out a new supply chain efficiency program across all 12 regions, and I was neck-deep in implementation. It was complicated and demanding and exactly what I needed, problems I could actually solve. On February 14th, my boss Sarah called me into her office. "So, the Regional Leadership Summit is March 8th, she said. "You know you're receiving the Operations Excellence Award, right?" I blinked. "I'm what?" "Don't play modest. You overhauled 3 distribution centers, brought 2 major contracts in under budget, and your employee retention numbers are the highest in the company. You're getting the award. Black tie, the Meridian Hotel, the whole thing. Prepare a 3-minute acceptance speech." I left her office in a daze. The Regional Leadership Summit was the company's biggest annual event, 400 people, all our executives, major clients, contractor partners, local business press. It was the kind of night that could make careers. And I was getting an award. I called Jordan that night. "I don't have anything to wear to a black tie event." She laughed. "Yes, you do. We're going shopping. This is happening." The next Saturday, she dragged me to a boutique I'd walked past 100 times but never entered. I tried on 6 dresses and hated myself in all of them, and then the sales associate brought out a 7th. It was deep emerald green, fitted through the bodice with a flowing skirt off-the-shoulder sleeves. Elegant, powerful. When I put it on and looked in the mirror, I didn't see the girl who got locked out on Christmas Eve. I saw someone who'd survived. "That's the one," Jordan said. I bought it, and shoes, and earrings. I was doing this right. The week before the summit, I got the event program. I skimmed the award recipients and stopped at the contractor recognition section. Employee Safety Leadership Award. Marcus Thompson, Warehouse Lead, Redstone Logistics. Marcus. I smiled. He deserved it. He'd implemented a new equipment check system that had reduced workplace injuries by 40%. I'd read the report when his supervisor submitted him for the award. I wondered if he knew I'd be there. March 8th arrived cold and clear. I spent the afternoon getting ready with the kind of care I usually reserved for board presentations. Hair in a low chignon, makeup subtle but polished. The green dress fit perfectly. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who belonged. The Meridian Hotel ballroom was transformed, chandelier lighting, round tables with white linens, a stage with the company logo projected in soft gold. I arrived early, checked in at the registration table, and saw my name on the seating chart. Head table, next to Sarah and the regional VP. People were already filtering in. Colleagues I'd worked with for years, dressed in tuxes and gowns, suddenly formal and almost unrecognizable. I chatted with a few, accepted congratulations, and tried to calm my nerves. And then I saw Marcus. He was across the room in a suit that looked new, talking to a group from Redstone. When he saw me, his whole face lit up. "Ms. Harrison," he excused himself and came over. "Wow, you look, congratulations on your award." "Congratulations on yours," I said. "That safety program was brilliant." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "Just trying to keep people from getting hurt." "That's leadership." We talked for a few minutes, easy, warm, the kind of conversation that reminded me why I loved this work. He was good people. When his supervisor called him over for photos, he gave me a little salute. "See you up there, boss." I found my seat at the head table. The room was filling up now, the noise level rising. I scanned the crowd out of habit, recognizing clients and partners, and my heart stopped. Linda. She was near the back, standing by the doors, scanning the room. She was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, her hair done, makeup on. She looked out of place and determined, and when her eyes found me at the head table, her expression flickered through confusion, shock, and something that looked like panic. What was she doing here? My stomach dropped. The event was semi-public. If you knew about it, you could buy a ticket. She must have Googled me, found the company website, seen the announcement. She'd come to see if it was real. I turned away, pulse hammering. I caught Sarah's eye and leaned over. My stepmother just walked in. Long story, but we're estranged. If she tries to approach me, I may need help. Sarah's expression went sharp and protective. Say the word. The lights dimmed. The program started. Dinner service, welcome remarks, a video about company milestones. I barely tasted the food. I kept glancing toward the back of the room, but I'd lost sight of Linda in the crowd. Then came the awards. They started with the contractor recognitions. When Marcus's name was called, the room erupted in applause. He walked to the stage looking stunned and proud, accepted the crystal plaque, and gave a short speech about teamwork and safety culture. He was genuine and funny and humble, and the room loved him. As he walked off stage, he caught my eye and grinned. Then it was my turn. Sarah took the podium. Our next award recognizes operational excellence and transformational leadership. This year's recipient led a supply chain overhaul that resulted in a 23% efficiency increase and brought in $4.3 million in new contracts. She oversees 12 regional sites and nearly 300 employees, and her team retention rate is the highest in company history. It's my genuine honor to present the Operations Excellence Award to our VP of Regional Operations, Catherine Harrison. The applause was thunderous. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked to the stage. The lights were bright. I could see the first few rows clearly, then everything dissolved into silhouettes and shadows. I shook Sarah's hand, accepted the award, a beautiful glass sculpture that caught the light, and stepped to the microphone. I'd prepared a speech, 3 minutes about teamwork and gratitude and strategic vision. I looked out at the room, and my eyes adjusted enough to see Linda. She was standing now, near the side wall, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. I started talking. Thank you. I'm honored to receive this, and I want to start by thanking my team, the leads, the coordinators, the frontline staff who do the real work every single day. Leadership is nothing without people who believe in the mission. I thanked Sarah, the executive team, our partners. I talked about the supply chain project, the challenges, the wins. And then I went off script. I also want to say something personal, if you'll indulge me. I took a breath. 5 years ago, I was in a very different place in my life. I didn't believe I was capable of this. I didn't think I deserved a seat at tables like this one. I'd spent most of my life being told, in subtle and not-so-subtle ways, that I was too much or not enough, too needy, too damaged, too difficult. The room was silent. But I had mentors who saw something different. I had colleagues who respected my work. I had a career that rewarded competence and effort, not performance of who people wanted me to be. And I learned that the people who are supposed to love you don't make you earn it. They don't charge interest. They don't lock you out. I saw Linda's face go white. I learned that boundaries aren't cruelty, that you can love people and still walk away. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. My voice was steady. I wasn't angry. I was just telling the truth. So to anyone in this room who's ever felt like they weren't enough, you are, exactly as you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you. The room erupted. People stood. The applause rolled over me in waves, and I stood there holding my award, shaking, and feeling like I'd just jumped off a cliff. I walked off stage. Sarah grabbed my hand and squeezed it. That was perfect, she whispered. I made it back to my seat, and the program continued, but I couldn't focus. My heart was pounding too hard. When the formal program ended and the reception started, I stepped outside the ballroom into the hallway to catch my breath. Marcus found me there. He handed me a glass of water without a word. Thank you, I said. That took guts, boss. I laughed, a little shaky. I don't know what I was thinking. You were thinking the truth needed to be said, He paused. For what it's worth, some of us needed to hear it. Before I could respond, the ballroom doors opened, and Linda came out. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When she saw Marcus standing there, she hesitated. "Catherine," she said, "can we talk?" "No. I had no idea you were, that your job was." She gestured helplessly back toward the ballroom. "I know, you never asked. If I'd known, it wouldn't have mattered." I kept my voice level. "You locked me out on Christmas Eve because I couldn't give you another $8,000. You took $165,000 from me over 5 years and never once said thank you. You treated me like a burden and a bank account. So no, Linda, we can't talk." Her face flushed. She glanced at Marcus, aware of the witness. "You're being dramatic. Families have disagreements, but—" "We're not family." The words came out clean and final. "We never were, not to you. I raised you. No, you tolerated me. There's a difference." People were starting to come out of the ballroom now, flowing into the hallway, and Linda was aware of the audience. She tried one more tactic, her voice dropping, going soft. "Please, your father misses you. Then he can call me himself. We have coffee once a month. He knows how to reach me. He's struggling. We both are, without your help. You'll figure it out. That's what you told me to do my whole life. I'm sure you're very resourceful." I turned to walk back into the ballroom. Linda's voice rose, desperate. "After everything I did for you." I stopped, turned back. "What did you do for me, Linda, specifically?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "You gave me a place to live in my own father's house. You fed me, clothed me, the bare minimum of what's legally required when you marry someone with a child. You want credit for that. I didn't have to be kind. You weren't kind." My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. "You were cold. You were dismissive. You made me feel like a charity case for 20 years. And the second I stopped paying you, you threw me away." The hallway had gone quiet. A small crowd had gathered, colleagues, people from the event, all watching. Linda's eyes were wild now, cornered. "You can't do this. You can't humiliate me like this." "I'm not humiliating you," I said quietly. "I'm just not protecting you anymore. There's a difference." Marcus stepped closer to me, a silent show of support. Linda looked at him, at me, at the crowd, and something in her crumbled. "You're going to regret this," she said, but her voice wavered. "I really won't." She stood there for another moment, and then she turned and walked toward the exit. Her steps were quick, unsteady. She didn't look back. I watched her go, and I felt something release in my chest. Marcus touched my elbow gently. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. "I really am." We went back into the ballroom. A few people glanced at me, curious, but most had missed the hallway drama. I rejoined my table, finished my drink, and let myself enjoy the rest of the night. When I left the hotel at midnight, still in my green dress, holding my award, I felt lighter than I had in years. But the most significant thing happened on Wednesday. Dad texted, "Can we talk, just you and me?" We met for breakfast at a diner, neutral territory. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. "Your store is really impressive, Maya," he said after we ordered. "I had no idea you were working at that level." "I've been working at that level for years, Dad. You just never looked." He flinched. "That's fair, you're right." We sat in silence for a moment. "Stephanie is upset," he said finally. "I imagine she is. She feels like you intentionally tried to embarrass her. With those placards, the comments about things being donated." I didn't name her. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I told the story of where my work came from. "She says you're punishing her for trying to help you." I set down my coffee, looked at him directly. "Dad, do you actually believe she was helping me when she threw away Mom's scarf?" He looked away. "She didn't know it was your mom's. It was on its own hook, labeled, she knew." "Maya, do you remember when she redecorated the house? When she got rid of Mom's chair, her books, her garden? Do you remember how you told me it was time to move forward, that I needed to give Stephanie a chance? That was different. It wasn't different. It was the same thing she's been doing for 12 years, erasing anything that didn't fit her vision of what our family should look like. Erasing Mom, erasing my work, erasing me. Dad's face was pained. She was trying to help us move on. After your mom died, we were stuck, Maya. We were drowning in grief. Stephanie brought life back into the house. She brought her life into the house. There was no room for ours. Silence, long enough that the server came by to refill our coffee, breaking the tension momentarily. What do you want me to say? Dad asked finally. That I should have protected you better, that I should have told Stephanie to back off. Fine, I should have. I was trying to keep the peace, trying to make a blended family work, and I didn't see how much she was. He stopped. I didn't see you clearly. I saw a kid who was stuck in the past, and I wanted you to move forward. I wasn't stuck, Dad. I was grieving and building, both at the same time. I see that now. Do you? Or do you see a successful store and now my work seems legitimate? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I felt something inside me settle, solidify. I love you, Dad, but I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in pretending the past didn't happen. I'm not interested in a relationship where my work is only respected once it's profitable. And I'm definitely not interested in managing Stephanie's feelings at the expense of my own boundaries. So what does that mean? It means I need space, real space, not the give Stephanie a chance space where I'm expected to shrink myself to keep her comfortable. Actual space to build my life without interference or commentary or helpful suggestions that are actually just criticism. She does care about you, Maya. Maybe, but caring isn't the same as seeing, and she's never seen me. Dad looked down at his coffee, his hands wrapped around the mug like it was anchoring him. Can I try to see you better, to have a relationship that isn't about keeping Stephanie happy? I wanted to say no. It would be easier, cleaner. I'd already built a life without them. I didn't need their approval or their presence. But he was my dad. The man who'd learned to braid hair from YouTube, who'd sat with me through the worst of the grief before Stephanie. There was still a thread there, thin but real. Maybe, I said, but it has to be different. You have to stop asking me to be smaller, and you have to stop expecting me to manage Stephanie's emotions. That's fair. Is it? Because you've said things were going to change before. He nodded slowly. You're right, I have. I can't promise I'll get it right immediately, but I can promise to try. Actually try, not just say I'm trying and then fall back into old patterns. It wasn't enough, but it was something. We finished breakfast, hugged in the parking lot, awkward but real, made vague plans to get coffee again in a few weeks. As I drove back to the store, I felt the strange bittersweetness of partial resolution. My relationship with my father wasn't healed. It might never be what I wanted, but it was honest now, at least, built on reality instead of performance. Stephanie, for her part, went silent. I heard through the suburban gossip network, via a mutual acquaintance who followed me on Instagram, that she'd been telling people she always supported Maya's creative side and helped her get her start. The narrative revision was predictable, almost funny. I didn't bother correcting it publicly. The people who mattered knew the truth, and Stephanie's need to save face, to maintain her image as the supportive stepmother, was her problem, not mine. She'd lost her power over me the moment I stopped needing her approval. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my studio, a larger space now, behind and above the storefront, with actual windows that get morning light and enough room for a cutting table and organized fabric storage, and Simone's desk in the corner. It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. I have a custom order spread across my table, a reconstruction commission, a customer's late mother's wedding dress that she wants transformed into something wearable, something that honors the original but fits her life now. It's exactly the kind of work I love. Delicate, meaningful, collaborative, taking something precious that no longer fits its original context and reimagining it into something new. I'm hand-stitching a seam, the repetitive motion meditative, when my phone buzzes. An email from a boutique in Portland asking about wholesale terms. I forward it to Simone to handle. She's better at the business side than I am, loves the negotiation and logistics that make my brain tired. The store downstairs opens at 10. I have a consultation at 11 with a client who wants a custom blazer. This afternoon, I'm teaching a workshop on basic garment reconstruction at the community college, something I started doing monthly, passing forward the knowledge I taught myself. My life isn't perfect. Money is still tight some months. I work too much. I haven't dated in over a year because I barely have time to sleep, let alone maintain a relationship. But it's mine. Every piece of fabric, every design decision, every business choice, mine. Nobody is telling me my work is clutter. Nobody is managing me toward a more acceptable version of myself. Nobody is erasing the things that make me who I am. I've been thinking a lot about what I learned through this whole experience. Not in a therapeutic, journal prompt way, but in the practical, embodied way of someone who had to teach themselves how to take up space. The first thing, you don't need permission to become who you're meant to be. I spent years waiting for someone to tell me I was good enough, ready enough, legitimate enough to call myself a designer. But permission doesn't work that way. You don't receive it. You take it. You simply start doing the work and calling yourself the thing, and eventually the world catches up. Second, document everything. Not in a paranoid way, but in a practical way. I didn't keep detailed records because I was planning revenge. I kept them because I needed to remember on the hard days that I wasn't making it up. That the dismissals were real, the violations happened, the pattern existed. Memory can be a form of evidence, and evidence can be a form of power. Third, the best response to being underestimated is competence. I could have confronted Stephanie loudly, dramatically, made her understand exactly what she'd done. But that would have kept me in the dynamic where I was arguing for my worth. Instead, I built something undeniable. I let the work speak. And when she finally saw it, there was nothing she could say. The storefront was proof that didn't require her validation. Fourth, boundaries aren't built through explanation. They're built through action. I stopped trying to make Stephanie understand why her behavior was harmful. I stopped arguing with my father about whose version of events was accurate. I just moved, built a different life, created space where their opinions didn't reach. Boundaries aren't walls you build to keep people out, they're distance you create to keep yourself whole. And finally, some things can't be replaced, only honored. I never got my mother's scarf back. That specific object with her specific scent is gone. But I learned that grief doesn't have to be about preservation. It can be about transformation. I can honor what I lost by creating new things, by carrying forward the skills she taught me, by building a life she would have been proud of. The wrap dress I designed wasn't her scarf, but it was in conversation with it, and that turned out to be enough. I think about Stephanie sometimes, though less than I used to. I wonder if she understands yet what she did, or if she's still telling herself she was helping. I wonder if she feels the loss of our relationship, or if she's just relieved to have one fewer person to manage. Mostly, though, I don't think about her at all. I think about the customer whose mother's wedding dress is on my table, trusting me to transform something precious. I think about the winter collection Simone and I are developing, the new techniques I want to try. I think about the designer I'm mentoring, a 19-year-old kid from a low-income background who reminds me of myself at that age, hungry and talented, and told she's impractical. I think about the fact that I'm building something that outlasts the hurt, something generative, something that creates space for other people to become who they're meant to be. Yesterday, I got a message on Instagram from a woman I've never met. She'd read Kira's article, followed my account, been watching my work for months. She wrote, "I've been holding on to clothes from my grandmother for years, and my family keeps telling me to donate them, that I'm hoarding. But they're not clutter, they're research, they're inspiration. Your work gave me permission to say no, to keep what matters, thank you." I read it 3 times, sitting on my studio floor, surrounded by fabric and half-finished projects and the beautiful chaos of creative work. This is what I wanted. Not revenge exactly, not even vindication, though that felt good too. I wanted to transform the erasure into art. The dismissal into permission, for myself and for anyone else who's been told their creativity is clutter, their dreams are impractical, their grief should have an expiration date. I wanted to take what was meant to make me smaller and use it to build something undeniable. And I did. The light is shifting in the studio now, morning sun starting to hit the cutting table. Simone will be here in an hour. I have work to do. This dress won't reconstruct itself, and the client is trusting me with her mother's memory. But first, I'm going to do something I rarely let myself do. I'm going to walk downstairs, unlock my store, turn on the lights, and just stand there for a minute. In the space I built, surrounded by the work I made, under the sign that bears my name. I'm going to let myself feel proud. Not someday, when I'm more successful or more legitimate or more whatever metric I used to think mattered. Now, today, in this moment that I created through sheer stubborn determination and the refusal to be erased. If you're listening to this, if you've stayed with me through this whole story, I want you to know, I see you. If you've ever had someone try to clear space in your life by erasing the things that made you you, I see you. If you've been told your work is a hobby, your dreams are impractical, your grief is inconvenient, I see you. And I want you to know that you don't need their permission. You don't need them to understand. You just need to keep building, keep creating, keep taking up exactly as much space as you deserve. Which is all of it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, or if you've ever reclaimed something someone tried to take from you. I read every single one, and your stories fuel this work. And if this story resonated, if you needed to hear that you can transform loss into something beautiful, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started, and I have so many more stories about women who refuse to stay small. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing this transformation with me. Now go build something undeniable.